and welcome to Inside the Magic Circle. This is Jason Augustus Newcomb, and today I'm sitting down with a magician who has made a career for himself out of working with the Greek magical papyri, which, as many of you know, is a subject that I'm very interested in and have been for a number of years. And I love to talk to people about this. He has written a book called the Hekataeon, which is a series of self-initiatory practices to connect with Hekate, and he's teaching a few courses at the Blackthorn School on both Hekate and the Greek magical papyri. I am talking, of course, about the man, the legend, Jack Grayle. Thank you so much for being here, Jack.
Oh my God. Well, thank you, Jason. It's very much appreciated.
I just want to point out as well that Jack is always a snappy dresser whenever he's on video. So I've decided to wear a tie today in honor of him, and he's decided not to wear a tie, but that's okay. That's okay.
Well, I'm very impressed, and now I feel dressed down. I feel underdressed. So you put me on the defensive right from the start. So thanks a lot.
You definitely look snazzy still. Don't worry about it.
Well, thank you. I've noticed with the more facial hair you wear, the sharper you have to dress, just so as a counterpoint, so you don't look as sketchy as you otherwise would.
And I have very long hair, so I have to do the same to a certain extent.
Yeah, that's sketchy too.
So to begin with, Jack, you've really, you've come on the scene in a big way. I started researching Hekate a little bit more about, I don't know, a year and a half ago, and all of a sudden your name started coming up more and more and more, and your book came out, and your course on it came out.
Right.
How did you kind of discover that this was your interest? At what point in your life did you realize that this was something that was really important to you?
You know, you called me legendary in the intro, but what I think the only thing I'm legendary for is having a really boring origin story. I think I'm legendarily mundane among, self-professed occultists right now. I don't really have a near-death experience or a mushroom-induced vision or something that qualifies as a cinematic introduction to esoteric spirituality. I mean, all I can say is that, sort of like Dante said, when he came to middle age, he experienced a path in the woods, and he had to choose a deeper understanding of the spiritual mysteries or not. And I can say that when I became, reached, middle age, I realized that there was a series of hungers, of desires, of needs I had that weren't going to be filled any other way, of a desire for more intimacy with the unseen world, a desire for direct experience with those mysteries, which I sensed were beyond the veil of the mundane, but that weren't apparent to me, a desire to reach out to systems of magic or spirituality that were beyond the Catholicism that I had grown up with, which is very much a paradigm of someone else does the work, and you get the benefit. You attend Mass, but you don't say Mass. You confess your sins, but you don't absolve anyone. You can take the Eucharist, but you can't consecrate it. It's very much, there's a very passive role I found in Catholicism. And that drew me toward mysteries that were more hands-on and more esoteric.
So when some men meet middle age, they go out and buy themselves a Corvette, and you said, I'm going to devote myself to Hekate instead.
That's right. Other people buy, a Corvette or, vintage Star Wars action figures from the original 1970s release. And then I buy a copy of the Greek magical papyri, and it's more rewarding spiritually, but it's harder on a Friday night to roll down Main Street with the windows down and the systems up with your copy of the PGM.
I've got the PGM, ladies. Shall we read some spells together?
Right. Yeah.
So you had not been interested in magic at all before the last 10 years or so?
Well, I appreciate you judging my middle age to be within 10 years. I think that's generous on your part. No, I won't.
I actually thought I might be stretching it too far, but okay, go ahead.
Right. No, I've always been fascinated by the mystic, I'll call it. Even when I identified as a Christian, as a Catholic, I was drawn to Grayle mysteries and Celtic lore that intermixed Celtic spirituality with the legends of Britain and that sort of thing. That area is sort of the gateway drug for me into esoteric and pagan mysteries, right? And I was always fascinated by fantasy worlds, alternate realities, the ideas of, there being multiple levels of existence, patched up right next to them, the world of dreams, the worlds of what we might call archetypes and Jungian Joseph Campbell type legends and folk tales and all of that. It's always been with me, and this desire to connect more deeply with the mysterious side of things. It was only that it found expression within the past decade when I began to delve into traditional systems, I'll call it.
So you flirted with the sort of Celtic mysteries, reading some of the Matthews, John and Caitlin Matthews books, or
Right.
something like that, and
Absolutely right. I mean, they've written more than 90 books on Grayle lore and Celtic spirituality. Those two are remarkable. And of course, anyone who desires to immerse themselves in, what might have been, Druidic lore and what might have been the Grail, the mysteries of the Grail search and all that can look no further from them. They're an endless font. I was looking just yesterday at their beautiful book, The Winter Solstice, which is one of my favorite seasonal books. It's a great compendium of traditional folklore from around the world about the solstice traditions. Nothing gets me more in the spirit of the dark season than that book by them. I just love it.
Now we are kind of in that period, in the winter period right now. Do you feel like there's stuff in the Greek magical papyri that honors these seasons? I know that there are some seasonal sorts of things that come up in it, and time, calendrical things. But are there any sort of seasonal bits in it? I don't think I can recall any.
Well, there's certainly no like spells to animate a snowman or anything like that. We are, for those that might not know, the Greek magical papyri, though it's called Greek, they really are, a series of several hundred spells, hymns, and invocations that were disinterred from a tomb, probably in Thebes in Egypt, and they were written in late antiquity. So they were created in Roman Egypt. So there is a strain of Greek magic and gods within them. There's certainly a strong strain of Egyptian gods. Yeah. There's a Roman overlay. There's influences of Jewish magic and Zoroastrianism, and they're just a melange. They're a mix,
What's fascinating?
As far as seasonal stuff goes, the main thing I can think of is discussions of there are spells that reference the flooding of the Nile, or the star Sothis, the dog star, which came midsummer back then and heralded the season of contagion. Right. So I think, for ancient Egyptians, the flooding of the Nile was the big seasonal event. And the Nile was an epiphany of Osiris, the great lord of the dead, from whom all fertility and the afterlife came. And so I think any seasonal references would probably be more references to spring and summer and fertility.
Yeah, I mean, did they even have cold weather in Egypt per se? I live in Florida, so it never really gets cold here at all. So.
Oh, I forgot that you are right. Yeah. Well, you can make it frost on the ground occasionally. Maybe they had the same thing, but probably not much, right?
So you were interested in Celtic mysteries, but how did you discover the Greek magical papyri?
It came through my trying to develop a devotional relationship to Hekate, because she has such sort of an outsized role in magic and sorcery today and contemporary, witchcraft and magic and stuff like that, and neo-pagan systems. But of course, there's not a lot of material on her. In ancient times, you have this beautiful account by Hesiod from about 800 BC. And then you've got, snippets of her referencing her, but she was not a major goddess, and she did not have the number of temples or the amount of devotees that say Artemis did, or Aphrodite, or anyone like that. So in trying to research her and trying to, find traditional authentic material, I kept coming up with, every time I would find a remarkable spell, it would cite it to the Greek magical papyri. And I was like, well, what is this thing? Every fascinating, frightening, wondrous thing I find goes back to the PGM, Yeah. And then I would read books like Jake Stratton Kent's Geosophia, right? Or I would read other accounts like David Rankine's Liminal Rites, or Hekate Sotera, and they would refer back to the Greek magical papyri. And so I was like, I've got to read this thing, because clearly it's a treasure trove of Hekataeon spells and hymns and all that. Now, little did I know, it's this outrageous, unorganized, massive spells
Mhm.
to all kinds of solar and chthonic deities, to include Persephone and Helios and Ra and Thoth and Anubis, right? And all these deities. So I was overwhelmed by what I found, because it is an overwhelmingly disorganized, beautiful, frightening, off-putting, bizarre, and challenging collection of spells from late antiquity.
Now, in that quest, you created a book called the Hekataeon, and from what I understand of the course that you taught later on that subject, is that you kind of teach sort of three aspects of Hekate: the Hekate that's the celestial Hekate, the Hekate that's the liminal Hekate, and the Hekate that's the chthonic Hekate. Am I correct? Those are the three, or am I mixing it?
Yeah. No, that is true. I do. I have a copy of it here, so like any used salesman shilling his wares, I'll hold one up. This is my book, the Hekataeon.
But I want to mention to people that right now, I don't know that you can get a copy, but they do have a second print that they're working on eventually,
Right.
and it's basically been sold out very quickly after it came out. But they're going to offer more copies maybe next month. They're gonna open it up again, or
Right. They've had two printings. The second one was for 800 copies. I think all but about 100 have sold out. They've temporarily suspended pre-orders to work out some shipping issues with the UK and Australia. And I expect very soon they'll reopen pre-orders to sell the final 100 copies.
but it's just going to
Uh,
be those 100, and then it's done again.
But that'll be done for this hardback copy.
So
And
if you're interested in this book that we're going to discuss a little bit more now, keep an eye on the XAXR site, and when it starts opening up, order it right away, because it's not
yeah,
going to
that's
be
right.
there.
The publisher is I.T.I.F.E.L, which is a great publisher out of Finland, and I'll be posting on my Facebook page when the pre-orders open as
Am,
well.
am I also wrong in saying that when this second printing opened up, that sold out? I mean, it sold out really fast.
It did sell out pretty quick. We sold out about 800 standard copies in the first run of the book last year, and when they reopened, they republished about I think it was maybe it was 600 or 800. I can't remember, but we sold out all but 100 in about a month this time
Yeah.
around. So it went well.
So
I was pleased.
those last 100 are not going to be sitting around for you. If you see that it's
No, no.
available and you're interested in the topic, grab a
Yeah,
copy while
right.
you can.
Yeah.
Okay, so you became interested in the subject of Hekate because she was a magical goddess. What drew you to Hekate in the first place?
Yeah, well, I was drawn to her because I'd known of her from when I had a background in theater, because she appears as a character in one of Shakespeare's plays, The Tragedy of Macbeth, as a witch queen, right? So I already kind of knew of her. And then when I thought I want to get my hands more dirty with, the interactive side of esotericism, where you're creating your own reality, you're joining in, you're a co-creator in the world you live, in your own fate and your own destiny. How can I do that? What's my gateway into that world? And as you probably know, Jason, in a lot of contemporary magic, it's all kind of a head game. If you wish for something, you'll get it, or just by the power of kind of clenching your fist and furrowing your brow, you're supposed to get what you want. But in traditional magic, you needed a mediator, and that goes whether you're talking about Solomonic magic or whether you're talking about, you know, magic in late antiquity or pagan times. If you wanted to actually work your will, then you needed some sort of a friend. You needed an ally. You needed someone on your side who was part of the unseen world. There was a spirit, basically, And what I've discovered in the PGM is that very often that mediating spirit is either Hekate or Hermes or
Right.
one of the angelos, the messengers that would travel back and forth between the world of the living and the world of the dead,
And
especially to help you involve yourself with spirits.
and those angels and demons that are in the PGM are largely representatives of Hekate or Hermes as well, or Typhon. Those seem to be the main three sort of figures that everything
You're,
seems to be connected with.
you're right. And what people discover right away when they look at the magic of late antiquity is there's not real distinct borders between gods and goddesses. They blend together. So you might call upon Hekate Selene, you know, a conflation of Hekate and the Titan of the moon. You might call upon Apollo, Helios, Ra, three solar powers, Egyptian and Greek, you know, lumped together. You might even call upon Mithros and Ptah and Horus, you know, various deities like that.
And Yahweh in the same spell.
Exactly, right. Right, yeah, Yahuwah Sabaoth Adonai shows up, you know, with surprising frequently.
Yes,
and
very,
frequently,
very much so. Especially for people who are anti-Christian or you know that who want to get away from
right.
that. You go into the PGM and you're like, why is it referencing the Hebrew
Right.
God so much? And
Yeah, right.
Jesus is in it a couple times.
You're right. Yeah, he does make an appearance. It's true, and it is true that a lot of people whose neo-paganism is more reactive.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying, I'm a pagan because I hate Christianity. A lot of them are deeply dissatisfied with traditional magical systems. You know, they go to do grimoire work, and of course it's all, you know, it's traditional grimoires are all Christian based. You know, they go to look to the PGM, and, you know, the Abrahamic God makes regular appearances. Although you can argue that you're dealing with a more daimonic aspect of him.
Sure.
You're not pretending to be a traditional Jew. You know, you're not, just like you're not pretending to be an Egyptian priest. You're calling upon the daimonic, the influenceable, the compellable aspects of these beings. And you have to be open-minded, though. You know, you can't do it with a sense of you know, any whiff of something that's not purely Hellenic or, you know, purely Roman, that I won't have anything to do with. That narrows down the scope of your work considerably.
So, taking all that into consideration, do you see the Greek magical papyri as being more relevant than, say, the Solomonic magic, or just has its own spot in it? Like, how do you feel that plays out within the sort of, you know, changing?
Oh, no. You know, Jason, I don't know about you, but I find it to be just one current of
Magic,
sorcery.
you mean? Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
When you look at the magic of the Pygion, the Greek magical papyri, it is the exact same tech that is found 300-400 years later. When you look at Christian magic,
Mm-hmm.
they're using the same types of phylacteries, the same types of compulsion, the same types
Sure.
of self-identifications, but with more angelic names, right? And a saint start appearing. And then when you look at Arabic magic, right, of what we think of as the Dark Ages, very similar the way they compel jinn. And then
Sure.
you look at the Renaissance grimoires, which borrow heavily from and are influenced by, you know, Arabic magic, to the extent that the Heptameron, as you've mentioned before on your show, many of the kings of the air that you're compelling are Arabic jinn for all intents and purposes. And again, the same use of magical voices, of self-identification as a power greater than yourself, of compulsion with threat narratives, success narratives, you know, declarations of intent, you know, to me, it's like saying, you know, is the upper Nile the same river as the lower Nile? Well, they're all the Nile, though they may look different, you know.
There's a couple of differences that I think are interesting, and those are the lack of utilizing divine names that reference anything other than Christian and Jewish divinities in the later work, and also the lack of that. While there are maybe threat compulsions, but the lack of self-identification as a deity or as a powerful entity, those two things seem to have disappeared from that later work, but they're very frequent in the PGM work. So I guess the question that I have is, if I'm a magician who's just getting started with magic, is it better to go to the Greek magical papyri, or is it better to stick with the Solomonic stuff until you're comfortable? And then, like, you know, what's the sort of developmental ladder that you see that the PGM on? Is it further, or is it behind?
You know, the problem with your question, Jason, is that it implies competence. I don't know if I can cop to being competent to answer that. I will say for myself that if someone still identifies deeply with their Christian background, you know, if they were raised Christian and still have consider themselves to be having a connection to that current of spirituality, which many people do, that were
Sure.
raised
Oh
in
yeah.
that
Yeah.
system,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially if they were raised young and devout, you know, then I think grimoire work is a fantastic avenue because you're able to call upon that superstructure that already exists in your head. And when you
Mhm.
call names like Michael, the Archangel, or Gabriel, when you say the Hail Mary, when you call upon, you know, Jesus, these words resonate because at a very young age, you know, it affected our neurons, this, you know, devotional system we were exposed to, and it makes it resonate. You know, it's sort of hard to just switch horses and say, I'm going to honor Aphrodite when you only heard of her a decade ago. You know, that it can be a larger switch. But for people to whom Christianity is anathema, or who were never brought up in a Christian system or not a devout one, then why not delve into, you know, then, you know, Horus is no more foreign to you than the angel Gabriel. So why not start out with you know, a system that found its voice in Roman Egypt 2,000 years ago? There's nothing wrong with that. I would say most people know it's like wanting chocolate or vanilla. It's a matter of inherent intuitive taste. You gravitate toward one or the other. Though some people, of course, like chocolate and vanilla. You know, so cheers to them.
So, I mean, and certainly the Greek magical papyri has all the flavors: strawberry
It does.
and rocky road. You know, you're not going to
Yeah,
be short of them.
that's right.
But
That's right.
this brings me to a question that you know that I'm very interested in on a more personal level for every magician that I talk to. The area that you just careened through with what you're talking about. What are the spirits to you? You know, what are the daemons of the PGM? What are the angelos and like who are they and where do they fit in with your own inner spiritual life?
You know, it's a good question because, of course, on one hand, you have who's called upon in the text. And then on the other hand, you have who do you actually make use of as a practitioner?
Hmm.
Because, you know, any practitioner has limited bandwidth, right? I mean, you can't call upon every deity every time. So who's your go-to, right? And I think what I like about the PGM is there's so much material. Anyone who cares enough about it can start to develop their own cosmology drawn from the various facets of this powerful magic from late antiquity. I mean, I'm a devotee of Hekate, right? And so lucky for me, there's lots of spells and conjurations to Hekate and
Sure.
Hekate Selene, and that to me is very important. But equally important, so many of these spells conjure a masculine solar chthonic god, you know, and it's solar chthonic because he's a mask of the sun, you know, or the sun is a mask of him, you could say.
Hmm.
But he's a higher lord. He's both celestial and infernal, since the sun travels above us and they thought went beneath the earth during the
Sure.
night. So, but it has different aspects in the PGM. Sometimes he's called Apollo. Sometimes he's called Horus. Sometimes he's called I.T.I.F.E.L, amazingly, you know, the transgressive deicidal killer of Osiris. And sometimes he's called Ra or Pre or even Mithras. And sometimes he's called Yahweh Sabaoth Adonai or Osiris. There's all these masks of this solar chthonic power. And and each one of them embodies a different aspect of this mighty and ambiguous androgynous force.
Do you see that as all facets of one beingness, or do you see them as being different things that are called upon that sort of color what you're directing things towards? You know, are they pointing to the same thing ultimately, or are they pointing at different things, and the Greek magical papyri magicians are sort of pushing them together in an awkward way? You know, how do you think that works?
I say yes. I
Yes to it
think
all.
just as light travels in both waves and particles, I think these different powers in the PGM function both as masks that reflect that, like prisms that refract the light of a single light source,
Hmm.
but they also operate as individual entities with individual personalities with agency. And it doesn't make sense rationally, but the whole thing is sort of meant to be hyper-rational or sub-rational. And that's why you can deal with them directly. Say, I'm not going to call Horus for this one. I'm going to call Typhon 6.
Hmm.
But you can also say in the middle of that spell, you who are Horus, who are Ra, who are Helios, who are Prey, you who begat all gods, do this thing. And it doesn't make sense, but there's a deep internal and intuitive practicality about it, and I believe it works. So I try not to trick myself too much about are they separate or are they connected at the base. We're talking about mystic systems here, and anyone who claims with authority that they can say where exactly Apollo ends and Horus begins, I think is claiming something pretty outrageous.
I mean, ultimately, if we look at the Neoplatonic philosophical systems, we look at the Gnostic philosophical systems, we look at the Hermetic philosophical systems, they kind of point to a unitary state of being that encompasses it all, and we are all within that. We are individuals operating within that, but ultimately we are a part of that greater thing. So they're really, I mean, the further up you point, the more unified things become, it seems to me anyway. Also, I noticed that in the Neoplatonic system, it seems like there's a bunch of entities between the divine in its most divine sense and us in our most limited sense. There's the daemonic and angelic realms seem to offer that sort of connecting space. Do you feel that the names that, there are a number of sort of palindromes and then other just sort of commonly mentioned weird, names of entities or just simply vowels. Do you feel like those are the daemonic space between those things? Are we calling upon those entities when we utilize those names?
I think so. I think you're right. That idea of Platonic emanationism, right? That there's one unknowable source that begot a power that created all things, that begot another power that perhaps ensouled all things.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those created things are the gods that are sort of in the Iamblichus systems that are untouchable, unmovable, planetary. They exist outside of time. But then there's the gods we think of in myth that are aspects of them that can get angry or be dissatisfied or be hopeful or be pleased. And then there's their angels or daimons that are aspects or servants of them, just like angels are the servants of the Abrahamic God, that Apollo might have emanations of himself that can be offered food, that can have a conversation with you, that can owe a favor to you, that can be given a gift,
Right.
And that then there's your own personal daemon that might whisper in your ear or give you good ideas or guide your choices or remonstrate with you. And then there's the aerial spirits that are sort of available to you, that are hungry to be interacted with, that are subject to influence because they're sublunar. And then there's the spirits of the dead, which are, of course, very eager to have some sort of involvement with under traditional, conceptualization, because many of them are forgotten. They want to be offered something as simple as a glass of water, a piece of incense, words of encouragement, offered a meal. These powers, and much of the PGM, as you know, is ghost magic. It
Right.
runs on the spirit of the dead. It's not intellectual, except for some of the most theurgic hymns in it. Much of it is very much calling upon either aerial spirits or spirits of the dead to work with you to accomplish practical things. Get me off the hook, get me out of jail, silence that person who's bad-mouthing me, make this one fall in love with me, help my shop do better than it is, help me know what's going to happen next month, or help me get over my scorpion bite. All these things are spirit magic, where you use a mediator, such as Hekate or Hermes or Anubis, to call upon a spirit of the dead, or perhaps a god or an aspect of a god to be your friend, to form an alliance, to grant you favor, and guard and guide you so that you can make it to the next day. It's very much practical magic, much of it.
But you use a number of sort of scientific or semi-scientific terms when describing these things, vibrations and so forth. Do you see these entities as being discrete beings, or are they sort of hologrammatic, interconnected vibrations that are you know what I mean? Like, are they a thing, or are they like a technology?
Oh God, Jason, I don't know. I don't know. I'm the worst person to ask, because I've said this before, I don't really have spirit visions. I'm not good
Right.
at scrying. I don't do good oracular work. And I certainly don't have, visual apprehension of spiritual powers to the extent that I could say, well, that's so and so, but then neither did John D. So I don't feel bad. I the best I can do is look at results. When I do devotional work, do I feel a few weeks or a few months afterwards that I got results I was looking for? Um, I don't even trust my feelings in the middle of the work. Some people say, do you get that thrill of connection when you do it or not? Sometimes I do. Sometimes I don't. I'm so un you know uh you know unobservant of that all I can really do is just see, did it happen, did what I was looking for happen, which has forced me to be very specific in my workings, to say this is exactly what I need, and I need it to happen sometime this month. And then afterwards whether it did or not, and then you trust the results as opposed to your own subjective apprehension. And since my needle's often off the mark, I have to, I have to just
So, so
go with, yeah,
you trust whether it works or not, whether it's something that
right,
you feel is worthwhile doing. But
I
so,
do.
but when you're calling upon, because very many of the spells in the PGM very directly call upon a divinity, and some of them call upon a more, what seems to be a more a daemonic aspect of the divinity. But when you're calling upon that divinity in a spell, do you feel like you're talking to the divinity, or do you feel like that you're probably more reaching the daemonic aspect of it, and that's just going to be fine? Because if you call up a CEO of a corporation and you're like, I want to talk to Bill Gates, you don't get Bill Gates, right? Ever. there's no
Right.
contact with Bill Gates. I mean, not that he's running anything now, but you talk to someone who works in the reception area, and then maybe if you sound charming enough, you get a little higher up, but you're not ever going to actually talk to Bill Gates, right? So when you call upon Helios, are you expecting to like have Helios take action, or are you just knowing you're aiming in that direction, and whatever entity in between is fine as long as it gets done?
Well, I can say that I think all archers aim for the center of the target,
Hmm.
and wherever the arrow lands, that's where they land. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
So I think, I never say to myself, oh, dear servant of the servant of Hekate, please hear my prayer. I don't do that. I say, hey, Hekate, hear me. I've honored you, and this is what I need. Who she sends, or whether they're third or fourth rate, you know, declension of her, I don't bother myself with. I can't tell. I'll never see them in the first place. And
Sure.
most apprehension, I was a great relief when I read the Odyssey and the Iliad, because then I realized that even back in Homer's time, 1,000 years before the PGM was written, at least in those two beautiful epic works, most people apprehended the gods through natural phenomenon. You know,
Right.
most people didn't, even back in Homer's day, in a epic saga, don't have visions of glowing individuals. They'll see a flock of birds and they'll take it as auspicious, or they'll hear a crack of thunder, or hear a dog bark, or they'll hear some advice from their friend or their wife or their
Or a
sergeant,
stranger,
and
or
they'll
an
say,
unidentified stranger.
exactly. And they'll say, that is Athena talking to me, or
Right.
that is my father Zeus giving me advice. And they didn't mean it metaphorically, they meant it literally. They believe the gods reach out to us through the phenomenal world, which is to say, through nature, through animals and people that we are surrounded with, and to an extent, dreams as well. But it's a great relief, because then it reminds me of what Yeats is credited of saying, that there is another world, but it's in this one, which means that this world is sacred in and of itself, even the mundane part, because it provides the materia through which the gods influence our lives or appear to most of us. And so you're more likely to get a message from the deity you invoked when a friend calls you or texts you than you are, if you're like me, to get a thundering voice in an empty room, you know, telling you exactly
To
what you should do.
to be fair to Yeats, though, he's also credited with being one of the people who Westcott or Mathers from the Golden Dawn slapped a Tatwa card on his forehead, and he had such an incredible vision that he knew he needed to join whatever organization they were a part of.
Right.
So he had his visionary moments as well. um,
Oh, right. And I
so
don't mean to sell short. I don't mean to sell short those people. I think of them as mystics
mhm.
who do indeed, like Edward Kelly, who do indeed see and hear voices and apparitions, who have clearly defined dreams with powerful and transformative messages,
Mhm.
and who can see oracles and in crystals and things like that. I know they exist. I've met them, and they're telling the truth. And I have, great admiration for them. I'm not one of them, but
Well,
I
as
know
you
they're out there.
as I think you know, I believe anyone can be trained to do that if they choose to set themselves in that direction. But so I want to move a little bit into the even more practical than what we've been talking about, and I want to talk about like what your working environment looks like when you're doing spell work of various kinds, or even devotional work. Do you have
Oh,
a
thanks.
dedicated temple space for yourself, or?
Yeah, I do. I'm in it now. I'm in my I have an unfinished attic, so it's quite hot in summer and cold in winter, but I kind of like that. And I fill it with books and masks. I have got some you know, some idols and icons, and I do my devotional work here. It's nice because it's private, and I kind of like the fact that it's at the top of the house. It's in a
Mhm.
liminal place, right? It's sort of
Sure.
between the house and the and what's outside of it. The ceiling's kind of low, so I bump my head against it sometimes, but I've become very comfortable here. I've got one area that has more of a, some of my, Christian stuff is there. And I've got another area that has more of my, I'd call them my, pagan, or I've got some things from Thailand, and I use those for my daily devotionals and all that. So yeah, it's a good place.
So you also have Thai influences, Buddhist influences in your work, or
Right. I recently read Peter Jenks's wonderful book, The Thai Occult, and I went on to buy. I was gifted with an amulet from his website, and I've bought a few myself, and I've incorporated them into my work. And what's fascinating, Jason, what's fascinating is the systems I find personally dovetail with the PGM, with the Greek magical papyri, which is remarkable because they're Thailand and Egypt are about 4,000 miles apart,
sure.
and we're talking 2,000 years apart, and yet I believe they operate under the same principle where you're very often calling upon chthonic spirits with the help of mediators, of spirit mediators, and you offer them concrete offerings such as water, flowers, fruit, and all that. And you use many of the same techniques to make them allies and that sort of thing. So, and you use bodily materia. Thai magic is famous for using, pry, ghost substances, materia, much as the PGM does. It's spirit work that focuses heavily on restless spirits. There's a deep, I find, complementary current between the two practices, and I've been able to incorporate one seamlessly into the other so
Uh,
far.
I found that there's a sort of universal quality to magic, and I think we also have to keep in mind that even though those spaces were far apart and it took a long time to travel between them, there was an active trade between those places. I mean, there's things mentioned in the Greek magical papyri that you had to get from the Himalayas, basically. So I mean, there's definitely a connection between all those folks, whether it's you know
You're very right, and that's one of the things when I teach this PGM class, and
yes.
sometimes I get people saying, "Well, I'm
I'm
not
I'm
Greek."
I'm in his PGM class. I just want to say, and it's he's a wonderful speaker and a wonderful teacher. So we can talk about that more in a bit. But go ahead with what you were saying.
Jason's being modest. I invited him, I said, please come be part of this course, and he graciously accepted. And and provided your the magical substance you create, the natron, the myrrh ink, the idols,
I do make a lot of stuff. Yeah.
the phylactery. You've enriched the class immeasurably with the materials you sell on your Etsy site. Because for many people who aren't able to engrave their own amulets, don't have
Mhm.
access to laurel leaves or gold foil or, olive wood, statues of Thoth, you provide them. And I've been so pleased that you've offered that as a resource because it's helped people take their work to the next level when they might have limited ability to create some of these items on their own. So I'm so pleased that you did that.
Well, I'm so pleased to be a part of your course. The great thing about Jack's courses is that he's incredibly practical, and he's very open and gracious, and gives people ways of doing things even if they don't have baboon sculptures made out of olive wood, which is a pretty rarefied place to be living in. But yeah, I mean, so you're very inviting to approach the work
Thank
in a
you.
practical level. What I'm curious about your work personally is what, like when you're getting started to do a Greek magical papyri spell or any sort of magical working that you're doing, do you have like a frame ritual or a beginning that you do regularly to these things, or is everything just sort of how it is written in the text? Do you have starting rituals and ending rituals for what you're doing, or is it just literally just here, I'm going to open up the text and approach this?
Well, I have to say it changes whether I'm in my indoor space or in my outdoor space. If there's other people with me or if I'm alone, if it's meant to be a simple devotional work or it's meant to be something more involved, right? So I don't do the exact same thing every time. I can say that in the PGM, there's not, for instance, there are some spells that call upon the four winds, but there's not, people who have a Wiccan background, they're used to calling the four quarters every time, marking a circle, calling the four quarters, something you do set, right? And I think when it was a formal ritual back then, they would have been implementing, some of the typical Egyptian tech of circling the sacred space, perhaps sprinkling natron or holy water, then circling it with incense, calling upon perhaps the four winds or the guardians of the space, placating the land itself, having some sort of a conjuration of a mediating spirit such as Hekate, Hermes, Anubis, whatever, self-identifying as a power such as Thoth often, or Hermes Trismegistus, and then calling upon an authority to strengthen your work and flow through you that you can embody, that allows you to have the authority to call upon gods and ghosts and things like that, and then make a call to the power using one of the spells or hymns in the PGM, a call to, Apollo or Hekate or Osiris or something like that. So to do a formal working, that's sort of the pattern it would follow. And as you know, there's numerous spells in the PGM that have variants on that system. It might vary which powers you call vary, which authority you reference, vary, which god face you assume. But it happens frequently enough that if you want to do it kind of by the books, the pattern. And that, to me is the pattern. And that's what I do when I have a more formal working. It's not just purely devotional.
But there are a number of spells within the PGM that are incredibly short, that are just a few things here and there. Occasionally it says, and add the usual or add whatever, but they don't even always have that. Sometimes they're just incredibly short, just a few words or a few symbols, and that's it. So do you approach magic that way sometimes, or where you just do that little bit, or is there always something a little bit more that you've added to it?
I think the greatest mistake in working with this type of magic, or any really, but I'll stick to what I know, is trying to do something absolutely perfectly and thinking if you can recapture every syllable that they said back in Roman Egypt and say it exactly as they said it, under the conditions they said it, that it will work. And if you do anything less than that, it's a failure. People treat it like nuclear science, where if you're off by a very small amount,
Sure.
you might blow yourself up or get nothing. In my experience, it's not like that whatsoever. And I know that's true because, as you know, there's dozens of spells in the PGM intended to have the exact same effect that are all variants on each other, right?
Sure.
And some are quite similar, and some are kind of similar, and some are not that similar, but they're trying to achieve the same thing, and they have generally the same structure. And they might even be invoking the same power, and they might even have some of the same magical voices or some of the same, pattern, but they're different. They're different. And what it tells you right away is, oh, well, here's a dozen ways to achieve this end. It's like saying to 12 different artists, can you paint that mountain at dawn? Well, you're going to get 12 recognizable images, but depending on the artist, some might be very detailed and realistic. Some might be, more broad strokes. Some might be more symbolic. Some might be vivid in color, some black and white. But the spells in the PGM are like that. And so what it involves, you freeze up, you get paralyzed if you say right away, well, which is the right one? How do I do it exactly right? You'll never get beyond the first page if you do that. what you have to do is take a breath and say, okay, well, apparently there's more ways than one to do this work. Which way connects with me, with my own intuition, with my own background that I come here with? Do I have a Hermetic background? There may be Thoth and Hermes, the ones that I'm going to associate more. Am I more a reclaiming ritual, more into the goddess? Well, then perhaps Hekate or Persephone, these spells, Do I have a Christianized background? Perhaps Yehovah Sabaoth Adonai, for my Jewish or Christian background. You have to open up to your own experience to let your own, life and your own affiliations dovetail with the material so you can merge and create a hybrid of your own personal praxis and this work. And you enrich it, it enriches you, and you enrich it. I have a great friend who has a background in the African traditional religions. He's African American and he's deeply knowledgeable about those things. And he loves the PGM. I mean, it is African magic. It's from Egypt,
It is.
And Egypt is part of Africa. But he'll merge it with workings of his own that might come from West Africa or different things. And he shows me these beautiful rituals. And I'm awestruck at how he's able to adapt this current to his own experience and his own praxis and his own intuition, to call upon his own guides. So it's not like, I'm as a 40-year-old man, I leave everything I did before today behind me, and now I do the PGM. No, it's more like I'm going to add an additional layer onto my work and deepen it and add, different colors. It can be a beautiful, enriching process. And as you know, the PGM is suited to this because the PGM isn't a pure strain. It's a hybrid system. It's mongrelized. It's a mutt. And I say this as a mongrel and mutt myself, culturally, nationally, genetically, and this is a system developed. It's like a confluence of many rivers, Roman gods, Greek gods, Egyptian gods, Persian, Zoroastrian magic, Abrahamic deities, and you've got this influence as well of deities like, from Near East or, base or things like that. It's, it's a mix, and it's a beautiful mix. And the people who practiced it were culturally, genetic, racially, politically, a mix, And you see that from the Fayum portraits that show these beautiful, often people of color who lived in late antiquity in Egypt of this time, but all of them different hues, different looks, so human. And you realize this is a living system, and it's meant to enhance who we are and what we do. It's not meant to be LARPing, where we pretend we're ancient Egyptians, and walk around dressed like King Tut and don't try to pretend that we're living in the 21st century, and where we are.
One of the things that I think is interesting in the Greek magical papyri is there's two things. One of them is very sort of off-putting, and one of them is very easy. For the most part, the things that you would need to do the workings are largely things that are fairly available still. I mean, with a few exceptions, but I mean, we can get papyrus very easily, and most of the sort of incense ingredients and stuff are very, very available. So it's approachable from that perspective. But there is another perspective where there's a lot of sort of animal sacrifice and substances, animal substances that are either, I mean, just not something that modern people would be comfortable working with, or really illegal to get your hands on. So one of the things that I think is fascinating in your course, and I don't want you to reveal it because I think it's actually worth the price of admission, is that there's some stuff in the Greek magical papyri that frees you from that to a certain extent. And how did you kind of come to realize that like you could work this system and just sort of avoid some of the more unsavory bits of it and still be honoring the magical? Like how long did it take you to kind of come to that realization?
Well, you know what, you've put your finger on it. And what turns a lot of people off, as you know, when you crack the Greek magical papyri for the first time, the spells aren't in any sort of order. One of the very first spells you come across is a spell that requires you to kill an animal.
A cat, I think, right?
Yeah, cat. Well, there's cat drownings, there's falcon stranglings throughout the whole thing, and then there's a different type of killing, which is sacrificial blood offerings, which were typical in Greek culture, the gods, ironically, though they didn't eat or drink blood, they ate, ambrosia and nectar. But in the traditional system, they did, appreciate blood sacrifice. And a lot of times animals would be sacrificed at the temple. Then the priests would eat the food and burn the offal to the gods. So it was part of their culture. They weren't being malicious, of course, or sadistic. It was part of their current of spirituality, but is no longer for us today, at least those of us who live in the United States, certainly, or Western Europe. So the question is, what do we do with that, right? And because the first impulse is, oh, well, I guess I can't do this spell. You have to strangle.
Right, that one's outside, yeah.
Or, I can't do that spell. I have to behead 3 roosters, and drink their blood. I think my first impression was the same. We'll skip to the next one. But then I went back and read them, and the more I read them, I thought, you need to look at what the function is of the killing. What function is it performing here?
Mm-hmm.
And some of them that are simply sacrifices, you're simply giving to the god. You're killing animals that are associated with it so that it can enjoy their life essence, presumably. An offering to the sun, the solar god, you might kill a rooster, right? Well, the rooster is an epiphany of the sun because he crows when the sun comes up, right? So you can say to yourself, well, you know what? If I have to offer to the sun an epiphany of the sun, instead of killing the rooster, perhaps I'll offer, a piece of gold, or I'll pour out some drink that's solar, or offer herbal or stones that are solar. I'll write down characters or sigils that are solar. There's other offerings you can make besides killing. The god Geb was associated with geese. There's one spell that says kill 3 geese. Well, if you don't want to kill 3 geese, you can either order geese that have already been slaughtered and burn them as an offering to Geb, or you find something else that's an offering to the earth and you offer that instead. So in some ways, you can make substitutions when it's just purely an offering, right? In other ways, when there's a killing, sometimes the killed animal, as an epiphany of the deity, is meant to become an eidolon, Zoan, and it's meant to become an idol of the god. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to call upon Horus, there's a few spells that say drown a falcon, because a falcon is an epiphany of Horus. And once you drown it, you're going to mummify it, and you're going to set it up, and you're going to pray to it, make it offerings, and ask that the spirit of the falcon, continue on. Basically, you're worshiping a ghost of the falcon as an epiphany of the god Horus, through which the god Horus can act, right?
Yes, and as a conduit to that god.
Right, exactly. Well, falcon killing is illegal in the United States, right. Certainly. So what you have to then do is one of 2 things. If you're not going to skip it, you have to say, well, I can still create. There's plenty of spells in the PGM that show you creating an idol with a hole in it, and you put in the materia that is associated with the god. If it's Hermes, you might put in materia that's associated with Mercury, with Hermes, with that power, the metals and the stones and the feathers and the fur and the liquids and the oils of that, as well as perhaps a scroll with the magical name of the god,
right.
And things like that. You seal it up. And then there's consecration rites and opening of the mouth ceremony of that. So there's other ways to bring a statue to life in a way that it will conduct the god, besides killing an animal. But furthermore, you can call upon, the PGM allows you to associate as the creator god, as the demiurge, to create your own reality. And as doing that, as you know, there's some spells where you transmute substances. Just like the priest in Catholicism, he holds up the wine, he calls down, God's power, and it is transmuted to the blood of Christ. In Catholicism, it's not meant to represent or be metaphorically the blood of Christ. It is meant to truly convert to Christ's blood, even though the physical, of course, it remains wine by any objective standard, but it's spiritually Christ's blood. Well, the same process is found in the PGM. As you know, there's multiple spells calling upon you pluck a strand of myrrh, but then you call upon the spirit of myrrh to become the tears of Anubis. You call upon an oil, and you call upon the spirit of the oil to become, the sweat of Isis. You take normal materials and you call forth the divinity within them so that they can perform a divine function. So it is entirely possible, say, to create the statue of a cat or the statue of a falcon, and perhaps add some material like cat fur, falcon feather, something like that. Conjure it by the power in you after, using a spell to put on that God face of the creator God, perhaps Thoth, Yahweh, someone, and call forth the divinity that this is not a clay falcon or a clay cat. This is a living cat that breathes, that was born, that nursed at its mother, that has blood in its veins and fur, feathers on its back. This cat is the embodiment, the child of this God through which its power shines in an epiphany of that power. And now you place that item under water, or you strangle that item with your hand, and you call forth. You've called forth it as a living being, and then you declare it to have been killed by your own hand, and you call forth the ghost of the spirit you have created to embody this and to be, the conduit for the God itself to come to you. So it's the idea of saying, I refuse to give up on this power, and I'm not going to kill a falcon. What can I do if this magic is about allowing that God power to flow through me so that I'm a conduit for the creator, the creatrix, How do I use it in the same way that a priest calls upon, the blood of Christ to exist within a cup of wine?
What I find fascinating about this, first of all, I want to mention that all throughout his course on the Greek magical papyri, he shares this sort of insight into ways that you can make some of these spells a little bit more your own, make these spells a little bit more accessible, despite sometimes macabre aspects of the original text. But what you just described is a very positive thing. Rather than taking a falcon and drowning it, you take a statue of a falcon and you bring other things that are related to the sun god and you put them inside the falcon, and you put this creative energy into it. Another sort of, I think, similar practice within the Greek magical papyri and ancient magic is this very sort of angry, controlling, compelling energy where you sort of say, this person, if they don't come to me, I want them to be tortured, and I'm going to torture you, divine, because I'm an even bigger divine, and I'm going to, make your life miserable if you don't make this person's life miserable until they do what I want. There's very negative, compulsive energy not within all of the Greek magical papyri spells, and not even within half, but within an extremely significant portion of them. There's this very sort of, I would say, to me, difficult to wrap my head around components to it, and I tend to go, okay, that's a spell for another person. I'll use this more construct. Do you see there as being a way of taking that sort of compulsive energy and also transforming that into a more creative attitude? No?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
You're a little frozen at the moment, I think.
That my name for the threat narratives, and as you know, in the PGM.
Have we got a lot of people on the network right now? Because I've lost Jack for a sec here. Sorry, are you there?
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay, the network has gotten really unstable for a second here. Hold on, I'm gonna just make sure there's. Okay, let's go back to that question. The question that I was asking is, there's a lot of threat narratives and more compulsive aspects of it. How can we sort of wrap our heads around that as modern people and work with that in a more positive and creative way?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And a lot of people are sort of shocked when they first encounter the PGM because some of the spells have threats in them. Some of the spells are like, please do this for me, to a god or goddess, well, a ghost, and say, if this doesn't happen, then you'll suffer too. I won't be the only one who suffers. You'll suffer. You won't get what you want. And here's what will happen to you. And a lot of people are like, whoa, whoa, whoa. What is this? Threatening ISIS? Threatening, Yahweh? Where does this come from? And where it comes from, of course, is it's a typical Egyptian technology, spirit, of informing the spirit that they have something at stake too. You're not just asking. There is aspects of compulsion in many of these magical hymns and rites where you're saying, I am suffering. I need help. Help me, and I'll help you. If you don't help me, you'll suffer too, right? Which is interesting because a lot of the ways, we think, well, I would never do that with a god, and yet we do it with each other all the time. We'll tell a coworker, look, I need your help to finish this project. If you don't, you're going to be in trouble like me. We're both responsible for this project. Or you'll tell your romantic partner, if we don't make this work, how are we both going to make a rent, or whatever. We do it all the time with the people we love, even we do it with our parents, our siblings, because often as we have a joint need and oftentimes it's not being met and we have to work it out. It's part of a negotiation, right? And we recognize it as a human thing. Well, they would do it with the gods as well. And it comes down to them feeling like the children of the gods. It's not that they had contempt for their gods. It was that they felt that they were kin. So just like you could say to your own uncle, I need you to pick me up at the airport. You don't pick me up at the airport, then I'm going to show up and give you the bill. I need to get home somehow. It's 22 degrees below zero. I'm not going to walk, right? Most of us would have no problem having that conversation. Well, they would have that conversation with their deities.
So,
and yeah.
So if I'm not feeling comfortable with being compulsive with a god, does that mean I need to make more of a personal connection with that god and so feel like we are family, and then I can sort of say, hey, now we're connected. So that's
I think you it's a good point. First of all, as you know, it's always up to the ritualist what you say or don't say or do or don't do. And it's perfectly fine to pick a spell in the PGM and skip the threat, right? These spells are malleable. You can adjust and adapt them to your own needs. And if it's not your style, you should never say something you feel uncomfortable with, right? But that being said, if we are so afraid of offending a deity that we are unable to articulate what they have at stake if they don't give us what we need, then we truly do not see ourselves as either children of the gods or embodying them as containing a god force that is interwoven with their own power that we are aspects of, and I think that might give one pause and say, is there a chance, if I'm going to call on Isis, do I have anything of Isis in me? If I'm going to conjure Horus, do I have a Horus power, a Horus current flowing through me? Because if I do, even if it's small, then why can't I let the Horus in me speak to the Horus, that's outside of me, and let the two of them have a conversation? If I'm their blood flows through me. If we're kin, if I'm a reflection of them, a conduit of them, then it's not insulting. They're talking to their own blood, and I think it encourages us to think of ourselves as not separate from the gods, but aspects of them in a skein of being, that extends from the highest heights to the lowest depths, of which we're a single thread, and there's a familiarity there in that type of magic that I think is actually sort of a beautiful thing. But it's not to say that you have to threaten the gods all the time. I mean, I think that would be a really extreme situation. But
do you think that it might be best to try and go with honey before you go with vinegar in most situations, or?
Oh, I definitely do. Right? There's nothing wrong with treating the gods the way we treat people, and most of us give other people the benefit of the doubt first. We're respectful to them. We present our best selves. We're clear about what we want, and then we give them the benefit of the doubt. And if it doesn't work out the first time, we'll give them a second chance, and depending on how serious the situation is, we might have to escalate, our explanation for them of what we expect and why.
I really like the metaphor that you just gave about the idea of being at the airport and your relative, you have to get to your relative's house for the holidays, and you're like, listen, if you're not going to come pick me up, I'm going to give you the bill when I get there, because that's what we kind of agreed to here, right?
Right. And there's also a sense, their world was different from ours in a large way because every day they lived with this idea of necessity, right? Necessity, ananke, they called it. It was this idea that you had a destiny. Your
Hmm.
story, the main plot points in your story was already written by the fates, by destiny. And you could tweak it a little, but for the most part, when you were born and whether you had a comfortable life or a desperate one, or who you were going to marry or what sort of job you'd have was already kind of dictated. So they already felt like the gods had had a very firm hand in molding the shape of their lives.
Sure.
So for those people who were suffering, there was a sense of you did this,
Yeah. This was
you,
the fate that
yeah,
you created. So
right, right. You created this. You're the one that made me, this lonely or being prosecuted or this hungry or to have a sick
mhm.
child. So you know what? If I'm an aspect of you, then I'm going to call upon those bonds. I call upon you by the bonds of necessity. And as a fact, many of the magical spells say to the gods, I call upon you by bitter necessity.
Mhm.
And there is a magical conjuration, and sometimes it's the maskele maskalo conjuration, or sometimes it's different, the true name of the deity, or different barbarous names. But they often say, I call on you by necessity. But it's because they already feel like they're compelled by necessity. So, in a way, it's simply reflecting what's being done to them. You know, there's this sense of, I can do what you're doing. You compel me by necessity, I compel you by necessity. And there's even some spells, as you know, that say, as I am you, you are me, and whatever happens to me happens to you,
Right.
which is a profound statement, but it shows where it's coming from, you know? We're not even their kin. We're them, you know?
So how do you place that within your Judeo-Christian upbringing? The gods have obviously taken on a life of their own if you're working with them in this way in a practical sense. How did you transform into a person who sees the universe filled with these deities and their representatives? How does that fit in with your personal worldview?
Well, it's a good question. And especially Son House, the blues singer Son House said you can't hold the devil in one hand and Jesus in the other, uh, which is what a lot of magicians try to do. Um, but
Seems like
I
that is
think,
the essence of magic, right?
right, right. I think it's up to everyone to. A lot of people don't do that. They'll stick with one system or the other. I tend to give up trying to justify it intellectually or rationally. I was born into a Christian system. I have a substructure in my mind and my spirit that still recognizes, the angel Gabriel and Michael and Mary and God. And even if I tell myself I don't believe in them, well, it's not true. It was bred into me. They exist in there, whether I deny them or not. So I choose not to. I think of them as being entities that exist in a continuum with these other beings, some of which are celestial, some of which are aerial, some of which are chthonic. And as you know, that's reflected in the PGM.
Hmm.
It's completely consistent. The PGM will call upon Hekate and the Archangel Michael in the
In the
same
same
spell.
spell, yeah.
The PGM will call upon Yahweh Sabaoth Adonai and Horus or Apollo in the same spell. And, yeah, you can edit them if you don't want to say those words, but why not? I have a Christian upbringing and I honor pagan gods. I'll read it like it's written. Apparently, the sorcerer from late antiquity didn't have a problem with it,
Do you
and I
think
don't
this?
either.
Do you think the sorcerer from late antiquity sort of saw these beings as almost like technology, almost like sort of magic machines that they could if you call upon E.I.A.E, that's gonna set this wheel in motion, and if you call upon Anubis, that's going to set this wheel in motion. Because it seems like they're very free combining these things in a
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean. I get a different. I don't know about you, but I get a different feeling from different spells.
Mhm.
Sometimes you see a list of deities, and I wonder if they aren't there so that different clients they could adapt it if the client wanted a more Gnostic or a
I mean,
more
that makes a lot of
Egyptian.
sense.
Like,
Sure. Yeah.
right. But then sometimes I think there's definitely sort of a more is more vibe to magic of late antiquity, where it's like, if you name all 12 masks of the solar chthonic god, you might get better results than naming 2,
Right.
where they just seem to throw everything at the wall to see what sticks. And so I don't know, I kind of like the messy feel to it. And I kind of appreciate the inexactitude of it, because it matches my, sort of, bafflement. I have sort of an attitude, throw everything at the wall, see what works, and hopefully it'll work out for the best. And sometimes the sorcerer does that too in the PGM. Also, he's a lousy artist, and I respect that too.
Yes, very much so.
Right,
Very,
right,
very sketchy drawings in there. And I
right.
think they've got an aesthetic to them, and I honestly feel like if you were to draw better, I've seen a few people draw better versions of the drawings, and I feel like it takes something away from them, in a way.
I agree. There's sort of a rude power, a
Yeah.
crude force in them, but I love how simple and often poorly drawn they were. They're dynamic, but they're,
Mhm.
they'll say, draw a figure of this angel holding a sword, and you're like, I'm not that. Then you see what they do, and like, oh well, I can do
Yeah, I
that.
mean that's very doable at that point.
Right.
Another thing that's interesting from the stuff that I do is the variety that you see in the magical gems. Like some people are just these master artisans who are making these like
Right.
things that I'm like, I can't even imagine doing this. And sometimes it literally looks like they're just like, and that's it. They're just as
You
quick
know,
as they can get it done to sort of represent it, and then they're done.
well, coming from you, I cannot. Your amulets and your phylacteries are the most beautiful I've seen. I mean, you're a true artist, so I
In
appreciate
fairness,
that
there's not that
thought.
many people doing it, so I don't have a whole lot of competition there. But okay, so I want to talk to you for a second about something that we brushed upon a little earlier. You feel like you don't really see things or hear things or feel things, and yet quite a lot of the spells in the Greek magical papyri and magic in general require there to be some sort of give and take between the magician and the being that they're talking to, particularly if you're looking for information, but even within sort of more just general do this sort of spells, there's a sense that there needs to be some sort of an indication. If you don't see them or talk to them, or how do you feel that something is moving forward? Do you just trust that it's happening, or how does that work for you?
Well, as you know, just like John Dee used Edward Kelly to have his spirit conversations,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the spells in the PGM, which are oracular, the ritualist is encouraged to use the scryer,
Yeah,
right?
often a
And the
child.
scryer, right? And the scryer is often a prepubescent child, since they were considered to be androgynous, and that was considered to be sort of a liminal state where they were not having sexual characteristics. They were more amenable. And if you know young children, younger than 12 or 13, they often have, they have vivid dreams. They have an imaginary friend.
Mm-hmm.
They see there's a creature under the bed, or they see ghosts. They are more amenable to the spirit world. And so I find it encouraging. And some of the spells actually say, if you do this spell 3 times and don't get the vision you're looking for, say this compulsive formula. So I like the fact that even the spell itself assumes it could fail repeatedly.
Sure.
You might not get the dream, or you might not get the vision, or you might have to increasingly argue with the spirits. Why are you not giving me what I need? And there's a very practical aspect to it that assumes some people are never going to have visions. Some people might only have them after repeated attempts, and some people might get them right away. And those people, all of us, I think, in this world, know a friend that has vivid dreams, or a friend that has spirit visions, or a friend that's very good at scrying. And
Yes.
I think it's completely within the current of the PGM to say, hey, to your friend, will you work with me on this? I want to do this conjuration, but it's for a dream oracle, or it's for a vision, and I'm not good at it, and you are. That is completely acceptable, in that, not only acceptable, but explicitly described in the magic of the PGM, which is great. So you can outsource the work you're not good at. It's very practical.
Yeah, and I think that like a lot of people feel like if they do something and they don't immediately get some sort of amazing sort of
Right.
pyrotechnic or otherwise transformative experience within it, that they've somehow failed. But there's a it's possible to succeed without having that sort of stuff. It seems like you're implying, and also that it's possible to fail a number of times and then succeed eventually. And it's important not to just give up after that first less than ideal experience. Am I getting you correctly there?
I do. And I mean, I'll throw in too. I think there's two measures of success. Well, even if you don't see spirits or whatever, the first measure is, did you get what you asked? Did you ask for something? And
Right.
did you get it? Which is actually healthy in itself, because it makes you ask two questions. What do I need? And actually ask for it. And something that simple is actually really important. And a lot of us skip that step. A lot of us might feel unfulfilled or feel unhappy or feel lost, but we've never actually looked deeply to say, what do I really want? You know, is it a new career? Do I want to move? Do I want a partner who supports me? Do I want a child? Do I want to be free of the constraints of what, you know, it forces you to actually figure out what you want. It forces you to actually ask for it in a way that's dynamic. It's not just saying, oh, you know, I hope I get $1 million. It's saying, I would like to live near the ocean. It's important to me. I would like to work somewhere where I can use my creativity. I would like to go home and have someone waiting for at night who respects me. Those are healthy things just to say, you know, after contemplating. And if you can structure it in a working, you burn incense and you light a candle, you make an offering, you call upon a power, you identify as a powerful conduit of the gods, and you do a working calling spirits or forces or powers to give you what you want, and you name what you want, and you say, I expect this to actually happen. This isn't just therapy. Like, I want this to happen this year, you know? And if it doesn't work a month later, you do it again and say, I'm no closer than I was before. Where's the
Right.
love? Why is this not working? It's dynamic. It's active. You're engaged. You're trying to change your fate. It's healthy. You're engaging with the unseen, and you're also giving yourself the respect you deserve to try to improve your life, to try to be something you weren't before, try to get something no one was going to give you. And it is an inherently healthy dynamic. It also goes without saying, if you're doing it right, encourage you to make life choices along the way in the mundane world to further your own ends
That
as you
brings you
try to,
towards the things you want to have happen.
as you try to co-create this reality with the help of your spirit powers you're conjuring. And so I would say the process is healthy to begin with. Expecting real results and perhaps getting them is extremely healthy. And I would even argue, if you don't feel like there's been success after a time, it is still healthy to have swung for the fences spiritually and come to the decision, well, that didn't work. Because
Sure.
it begs an important question. If that didn't work, what will? You know?
And ultimately, if it didn't work, is it something that you cared about enough to make it happen, or is it something that you just thought you wanted?
Exactly. It makes you say, is there something I can, if that didn't work, what then? If I give it up, well, it wasn't that important, you know? But if I'm not going to give up, what's the next step? Either way, it's self-knowledge. It's gnosis. You come to know yourself, like the words above the Temple of Delphi, noti soton, know yourself, nothing to excess, you know? And many of us are afraid to know ourselves. We don't want to admit what we want. We don't even
Sure.
want to admit to ourselves, I'm not happy being here, being who I am, you know, in a way that matters. It's a healthy conversation to have.
It's funny because I teach a course called the New Hermetics, and it's actually a multi-level course, and it's kind of based a little bit on the Golden Dawn system, although it's much more sort of personal and in the personal world rather than in the ritual world to a large extent. But the first thing I ask people to do is to set goals for themselves. And out of everything in the whole program, this is the hardest for 99% of people that sign up for it. They don't know what they don't want. They don't know how to set a goal. They don't know how to express what it is that they want at all.
Yes.
And the Greek magical papyri are interesting to me because there's no spell for getting married. There's no spell for, or at least it's not directly that. There's no spell for getting rich. Instead, there's spells for getting someone to be interested in you, obsessed with you, in love with you, you know, or want to have sex with you. And there's spells for making your business go better. I think it's very interesting how practical the magic of that time was in terms of what people might want. You know, there's healing spells, but they're healing spells for very specific kinds of things, like getting stung or getting bitten, or you know, or having a fever or whatever. They're very specific to kinds of things that are happening, but a lot of people don't really know what they want. They don't know what the business they want to be in. They don't know the partner that they want to have. You know, so it's very our lives are very ambiguous, and the spells that are in that particular corpus are so direct and powerful, and so like, if you want this, here's the path to this through this spiritual agency. But you have to know that you want that, right? I mean, you have to be interested in something specific in order to make that happen. So you have a much more rich connection with a fairly large group of people who've been working Greek magical papyri than probably a lot of people. Like, what are sort of the practical stumbling blocks that you're finding most commonly amongst the student population that you're working with?
Well, I think it ties into what you just said. A lot of times there's a sense of not knowing what one wants. And I think when that happens, what I think that means is that old idea that everyone had a diamond, everyone had their own personal protective spirit, like the Christian idea of a guardian angel that was specific to you, that helped you navigate your life and kind of whispered in your ear what you needed to hear when you needed to hear it. And I think when I think of people that don't know what they want, that sort of lost the savor of life, that feel at sea, I think of people that have grown deaf to their diamond, to their guardian spirit, to their personal power that's over them. And I think the best sort of working you can do for that, there's many, as you know, conjurations in the PGM, to call upon a god to give you a diamond, to give you a protective spirit, to give you an ally that will help you. They'll just like be your friend, you know? And that, the idea behind it, it sounds supernatural, but really the effects are intensely practical. If you had a friend walking around with you all the time, they would try to cheer you up when you're sad. They'd give you good advice when you're confused. They'd engage you to talk when you feel silent or mute. They'd remind you of the good things in your life. You know, a friend, a lot of us are friendless, you know, or our friends are, you know, they're people online that we've never met. And a lot of us, more and more, are in desperate need of a real life friend who's engaged with us, who is invested in us, who knows us and wants the best for us. And a lot of us don't have that. And when you don't have that, and when you're subject to depression or anxiety or whatever, it can be hard to figure out how to get out of your slump, emotionally, professionally, romantically. And then I think the best thing you can do is these, and a lot of them, as you know, are very straightforward. You might burn incense, you know, you might get up at dawn, but there's not a lot of sacrifice. There's not a lot of materials you need. But you call upon these powers, Hekate, Selene, or Helios, Ra, and you say, send me your angel, send me your spirit to be my friend and ally, to be with me all the days of my life, to make people like me and to help me be successful and well-loved. And that's what we all want, you know, we want to be engaged, we want to be respected, we want to be involved and be confident, and there are spells to do that. So it's what's great is you're 100% right. Before you can even reach, oh, I'd like to have a long-term relationship, or oh, I'd like my business to succeed, or all that, you have to know what you want. And the best types of spells for those are asking for a guardian and a guide, an assistant, a spirit that will whisper in your ear, that old Roman sense of a genius for an artist that would help inspire them, give them ideas, you know, be with them. And I think that's some of the most kind of theurgic, that's sort of the beginning of theurgic work.
Yeah,
To say,
absolutely.
give me a guard and a guide to help me elevate myself.
Right. Actually, in the Pymander of Hermes, he talks about the fact that there's a good daemon that people who have nous who are like, you know, good people have, and then there's a bad daemon who people who are very sort of subject to desire and so forth have, that just makes them more and more horrible as time goes on. So there's different possibilities and ways you can go with it. And in the Greek magical papyri, there's quite a few spells for connecting with these sorts of spirit guides and entities.
Right.
There's one that specifically says it's your personal daemon, it's your the daemon that was with you at birth, and that's quite an odd spell. It involves writing something on an egg and licking the egg off and then rubbing it on you and so forth. There's a number of, it's a multi-day process. And by the way, anyone who buys my inks, please don't use them for that spell, because I don't recommend licking my inks. They have all kinds of things in them that you wouldn't want to lick. Just that's a little public service announcement there. But that one is very specifically focused on your personal one that is supposedly the birth sort of daemon. But then there's the, Apollonian daemons, and there's Hekatean daemons, and there's Hermetic daemons. There's a bunch of them in there, the Typhonian daemons even. How does a person sort of navigate through that and choose the right one? In your course, I know you, like, pretty close to the beginning, you recommend that people talk to this Typhonian entity, that you have to go to the rooftop and you'll connect with that entity. And so I noticed some people were like, that's not the right spell for me. But not everyone has that sort of internal guidance system. How does a person navigate that? Because it's a huge, there's got to be at least 30 spells specifically for making a relationship with, and probably more than that.
I think that the nice thing is most people have an intuitive draw toward one or another type of spirit. A lot of people, if you say, would you rather conjure the protective spirit of, Apollo, as his solar healing, harmonious power, or if Hekate as an underworldly guard and guide, a psychopomp, most people will know automatically which one they're drawn to.
And there isn't a right answer to that right now.
Yeah, right. And then
for anyone in particular. Right.
Right. And the Typhonic work, calling upon Typhon's Set, even as his role, some aspects of him in the PGM he's almost a demiurge, he's
right.
In some
absolutely.
of
He's very
the
big.
Initiations. Right. He came before the gods. He's clearly a mask of the solar chthonic power, but only certain people are, want to wrap themselves in a shroud and call upon Typhon's Set to be their ally. But they're out there, and you sort of know intuitively what are you drawn toward. And most of us are trying to already fill that God space hole in our spiritual heart, where we're drawn to either feminine or masculine powers. We're drawn to either chthonic or celestial power. We're drawn to either a transgressive, oppositional disruptor, or a harmonious, healing, oracular power. Intuitively what you're drawn toward. And that's a healthy thing, to look at a spell and say, nope, hard pass,
Right.
or another one. But there's other times you look at a spell and you can't get it out of your head. You keep thinking about, what would it be like to do that? What could I expect? What would it feel like to say those words and stand there? And when you have that feeling, it's something you probably need to do if it sticks in your mind,
Right.
And most of us have that intuitive sense. And if not, it comes with time. And it's part of the beauty of the work. You start out with simple workings. You start to discover what you like and what you don't. And it helps you make increasingly complex choices to ways to develop your own spiritual menagerie.
And so to those people, because I know I've spoken to a few who don't feel like they have that intuitive sense of anything. They're very intellectual or very just disconnected from their body in various ways. And they don't feel like they could ever reach that sort of what I would call, although I think this is sort of dated terminology, the right-brained part. They're very left-brained, in the way that they function. Do you suggest that they just sort of stick with the simpler stuff and work their way towards the more theurgic? Like, how do you recommend that approach?
You know what? I feel for these people because I'm one of them. I'm quite.
You know what? You're not alone. Most magicians are. A lot of magicians are much more sort of brainy than they are heart-centered.
Coming from you, that's reassuring. I have great respect for you and your work. I will say that I think, again, people are sort of hardwired. Some people are very subjective, very mystic. They don't even know where the borders of their own being, are separated from the gods and the ghosts and the ancestors and the phenomenal world. And other people are so analytical, they could be experiencing a full-blown epiphany, and they would still be saying, that dog is barking because, you know, of this reason, and that thunderbolt I just saw is because there's a weather system moving in,
Right.
and the skin is rising on my arm because the temperature just dropped, and I'm hearing a voice because it's called an Aequism. It's a audio hallucination. You know, they can't get out of their head. Both ways are okay. Both ways, people can't change their superstructure. You know, some of us are very analytical. Some of us are very, you know, subjective and much more open. I would just say, um, do the work and don't worry about how it feels. Do a conjuration to the solar masculine power. Do a conjuration to the feminine phonic lunar power. Call upon Typhon Set. See what happens. Call upon Yahweh Sabaoth. See what happens. Just do it. Unless you have a visceral dislike for the work, just do it. And then note the changes that take place internally and externally. And if your life is better, you know, within the near future, keep doing it. And if it's appreciably worse, stop it. I mean, you know, we don't have to. I talk to some people, they're like, I called on Typhon 3 times. You know, first I lost my job, and then I lost my relationship broke up. Then I was in a car wreck. I'm like, Jesus Christ, stop calling on Typhon.
He's not the guy for you, obviously.
What are you thinking? Like, it's not going to get any better. I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
like, you have to be in touch with your own life. This work should be improving your life, even if it just makes you feel more, you know, more connected to yourself and to the unseen world. You should be happy doing it. It should make things better. You should be glad you're doing it. It shouldn't be such a chore. You know, you're forcing yourself to do it despite your life falling apart around you. I mean, that's not the point.
So this brings me to kind of one of the final things I want to talk about, other than a little bit more about your courses and your books that are you know in process. But in terms of your personal perspective on things, it seems to me there's 3 separate currents in occultism, and they're becoming more and more. In a way, I feel like they're becoming more and more separated over time. And those are the sort of like the feeling oriented, kind of what you were just talking about, the sensation that things are going better. Then there's a sort of intellectual where people like to study the rituals and study the history of things. And then there's the third, which is this sort of evolutionary path, and which is, you know, you're trying to raise yourself through the planetary spheres, or you're trying to just improve yourself in some way and become a more enlightened, you know, theurgical sort of, you're wanting to move more towards the divine. And it seems like that latter category has kind of been on the wane in a lot of magical circles, with the more practical aspects of, like, I want to have a Mercedes, and what spell can I use to get that to happen? And it's not so much about personal growth anymore for some people. What do you see your role within that as being? Do you see yourself more encouraging theurgy, or more encouraging sort of like feelings and more practical stuff happening?
Well, I'll say this. I'm a dilettante. But I'm a dilettante in the old sense of the root word delectare, to delight in. I delight in these systems. And I invite people to take these courses and explore them with me, not with a sense of I'm an expert and I'm going to tell you how it works, but a sense of someone throwing a buffet. Like, come to my buffet, try a dozen dishes. If you only like 2, you're better off than you were. These are wonderful things. Try out this exciting stuff. So I come from it, not trying to direct people towards specific channels, but to try to provide a sense of what's beautiful, what I find beautiful and passionate and inspiring about these systems, whether it's my Hekate class or whether it's this PGM class. I will say this, I do think, I know what you mean, where I think you read decades ago, a lot of people seem to be strongly invested in theurgic work to elevate their souls and, you know, find a new consciousness. Whereas nowadays, a lot of people in the system called thaumaturgy see more type of sort of magic of things, the magic of improving your reality. That might be an aspect. I think, you know, you can argue that politically and socially, people suffer quite a bit, and things have been going downhill economically and politically for many people over the past few decades. And that may be causing a sort of a lack of faith in institutions, a lack of faith in hierarchies of all sorts, spiritual as well as political, and a desperation for enough money or food or whatever, that forms of phonic or transgressive magic are more appealing now than perhaps they were, you know, a few decades ago, when perhaps more fraternal orders and magical orders and theurgic type work was more high profile, you
I
know.
mean, that you're the first person to answer this that way, and I think that's a really interesting perspective. And I mean, you are right. Those sort of organizations that seem to center around a brotherhood or a sodality of people, those are about sort of middle class or upper middle class people wanting to
Yeah,
find more meaning in their lives, whereas
right,
the thaumaturgical sorts of magic are about people wanting to improve lives that are not quite at that middle class or upper middle class
right.
lifestyle. So I mean that really makes a lot of sense. Um, but you yourself are not in that situation. I don't feel like, I could be wrong, but so for you it's a slightly different thing. It's a more, is it aesthetics that draws you towards the PGM? Like, what's the relevance of the PGM to the world and to you in comparison with anything else?
Well, I'll say what I said before. I connect with it because it's an intermingling of pagan and Abrahamic,
Hmm.
pantheons, which it draws me strongly. I'm attracted to it because it's a hybrid mix of cultural and political and racial systems. So I don't feel like an outsider. If I were just to decide I'm gonna do magic from the Congo, I'd feel like an outsider. Like I might be
Hmm.
appropriating it kind of, or I'm just gonna do magic of the this type of system. Well, do my ancestors come from that country? Do I understand their headset? The nice thing about the PGM is it's, as I've said, it's an alloy. It's a cocktail of
Hmm.
cultures, religions, races, spiritualities. And so for those of us who come like from America or different cultures that are already hybrid, mongrelized in the best sense of the word, it's very familiar. And you don't have to be from Egypt to do it. You don't have to be Greek to do it. And that's a great relief nowadays, where sometimes people are territorial about their magical systems.
Sure.
So I'm drawn to it from that perspective. I like how flexible it is. I like how it allows you to kind of, once you grasp the basic technologies, to run with it. Even if you could do a PGM spell, once you grasp the tech, even if you found yourself out in a field without your copy of the PGM and with nothing memorized, you could still do a PGM spell knowing the dozen or so building blocks they use to create their
Sure.
working. It's a system. It doesn't rely upon articulating syllable by syllable exact spells front to back. Uh, you know, so I like its flexibility. I like the fact that it's fluid, culturally. I like the fact that it came out of a time in late antiquity that was politically volatile. Where that there were plagues and there were
Hmm.
wars and there was an endless succession of defective leaders in the Roman Empire. There were people were anxious, and a lot of this magic was for people, like you said, who were desperate for simple things. They want enough to eat. They want to be safe. They don't want to be prosecuted or thrown in jail. They want love and respect. They want their businesses not to fail. All that's reflected in the magic of the times. And all of it is achievable, according to the PGM, by calling upon those primal powers, gods, and spirits that infuse our lives, that inspire us to be lovable, to be creative artistically, to be successful commercially, to be well loved and respected by the way we express ourselves. And so to call upon these powers and invite their godhood, their God energy, the God presence to live within us, to speak with a God face and a God voice, to achieve godly things, and where you're co-creator of your own reality. It's a way of breaking through the noise of the mundane, where we're sort of numb from social media and social distancing and disenfranchisement, lack of any meaningful relationships, and connect with something that is eternal and true and permanent, something that's our birthright and something that helps us to become that which we were meant to be. Um,
So this brings me back to one of my first questions to you, though. Do you think that the PGM, the Greek magical papyri, are the best conduit for that, or do you think that's just the conduit that you've found?
oh, you know what? I think every system appeals to different people, and it's a reflection of what they love and where they came from and what their internal compass points toward. I would say this. I think the Greek magical papyri, the PGM, the magic of late antiquity in Rome and Egypt, would appeal to a lot of people who are drawn to hard polytheism. They want to be on their knees. They want to make an offering. They want to
Hmm.
call out loud on a spirit. They want to feel the flesh rise on their arms. They want to feel that prickle at the back of the neck. They want to hear divinity in a thunderclap. They want to see divinity at a black dog appearing down the road. They want to engage with spirits and ghosts and that kind of thing. But they don't want to they're worried about appropriating a culture that's not theirs. They don't want to engage in something that's so contemporary it seems just made up by someone last
Sure.
week. You know, they want to do something authentic. They want to feel like they're part of a traditional spiritual current that goes back millennia, but they're confused because it's hard to say, well, what is the spiritual current? As 20th century Westerners, you know, some people make up, a lot of books begin, you know, the ancient cult of so-and-so survived for thousands of years undetected, and this is the first book to actually write down these magical practices. You know, well, you're on thin ice if you're claiming this is the first articulation of a magical system no one heard of for 2
Right.
millennia, right? So I think the PGM would appeal to people who are drawn to the gods of North Africa or of Rome or Greece, but who don't want to appropriate a culture that they're not born from, but want to be part of an actual living tradition that was practiced by generations of sorcerers back in the day and has a paradigm that we can generally see over 2 millennia through, you know, Arabic magic and Renaissance Solomonic magic. It's to be part of something beautiful and I think real and true and traditional, and I think it works. So, you know.
Well, and ultimately, I think that the cultural appropriation aspect of it is already present within the Greek magical. I mean, it's about that in a lot of ways. Like it's about going there. I think this magic name of the divine might be as powerful or more powerful than the one that would be from my culture. So I'm just going to bring it in and put it in the spell. And I mean, ultimately, our culture is the culture of that time period as it's evolved. You know, the Roman culture, which is really what this was encompassing, is our culture. Our days of the week are still named after the planets because of that very reason. You know, we are that culture.
No, well said.
As it
Well said.
has evolved.
And as you know, even back then, they didn't think the god's jurisdiction ended at the border of the country that was their origin
Right.
country. You know, I mean, Isis was worshipped in England by Roman
Yep.
soldiers who went there. Dionysus was worshipped as far east as India when
Yeah,
Alexander's soldiers took his practice there. You
and
know,
Mithra was worshipped all over the Roman Empire as well. I mean, all these
right.
gods that don't have anything necessarily to do with the place are.
Exactly. So these powers were considered to be, you know, cross borders, and they could be called upon in any number of countries. They weren't, you know, they did not act as gatekeepers toward their specific spirituality. Anyone who could understand Greek could participate in the Eleusinian mysteries. You
Mhm.
didn't have to be a Greek nationalist. You didn't even have to be a citizen of an, you know, of a Greek kingdom. You just had to understand what was being said, so that if you attended the mysteries, you could appreciate what was happening. And I think that that paradigm infuses this magic, and it's a great relief because there's always going to be someone complaining, well, this isn't for you, and why are you
Mhm.
doing that? But they can't say that with the magic of the PCM.
Well,
It's
they can, but they seem more silly
they
when they
can,
do.
right? They can, but you know. Okay,
So let's, before I let you go, I know I've been talking to you for a while, and I thank you so much for
oh,
all
it's
this time
fine.
that you've given me. But the I want to talk to you about the things that you've created. So the first thing, it seems like it was the Hekataeon, this book that you created of devotions to Hekate. Um,
Right.
you developed that, and then you developed a course on the subject. Now, are you going to be running that course again soon, or no?
Yeah, I do. I do both my classes a few times a year. So the next class on Hekate, I teach through the Blackthorn School. And the Blackthorn School is a great online platform where we record videos that can be viewed at any time. And as you know, we provide PDF documents and have a social media group, and we do some
A
Zoom
very
calls.
active Facebook groups that
Yeah, no,
people
it's
interact a
become a
lot in.
really fun way to meet other serious practitioners. I mean, my favorite thing about the class, I constantly people who are so much better at this than I am. You know, I meet people who can read ancient Greek. I meet
Sure.
people who can scry. I meet people who have decades of experience in Eastern meditation techniques. You know, you meet you make friends, you meet people who are good at this, who take it seriously, and have a real conversation with from all over the world, Ireland and Singapore and Australia and Israel, and it's wonderful. So these two courses, I have one class on Hekate. The next one will run in February at the Blackthorn School.
And so
And my next
is enrollment open in that now or not?
not yet, but it'll open about a month ahead of time. The one open right now, my next class in the Greek Magical Papyri, PGM Praxis, starts January 11th. So in about 2 weeks from the recording of this video, we are enrolling now for that. So if anyone's interested in the PGM, now's the time to sign up because it's going to be a fun course.
I'm going to try and get this up before that, but in case it's not, can people enroll late in the course, or does it close exactly at the?
Yeah, they can join it late. And if people choose to join late, they can also roll into the subsequent class. If I offer a next one, they can continue on and I'll put them in the following class. So even if you join halfway through, it's a year-long class. You can just kind of roll into the next class and not miss anything. And the videos can be watched after the fact. They're not live, they're recorded.
One of the great things about your PGM course is a couple things you've mentioned. One is that it's sort of like a buffet. It's like here's a bunch of different things that we can talk about. And then also the social aspect of it, there are a lot of people in the course who haven't done this spell, but they've done other spells, and when they come across a spell they've done before that's their personal thing, they share a lot of interesting other other information. And when they're just discovering the new spell, they bring some of their other experiences in. So the social aspect of it is really fascinating as well.
You're right. One of my favorite things is when people share their results. And what's exciting is it constantly blows my mind. It opens your mind up to what success can look like,
Sure.
Because you'll have a simple spell, and then you have 2 or 3 or 4 people post, here's what happened when I did it. And so you might get a glimpse of what the ritual looked like for them and how they made it work despite obstacles. And then you might see how it worked. And some of these might get startling results that look almost miraculous. And some of them get, it manifests in a very mundane way over time, but gradually it helps you appreciate there's numerous ways to get what you want, but you have to have your ears open and your eyes open and be open-minded to see it manifest in your life, which is a healthy thing, and it makes you pay more attention to your own life, which is healthy.
So the Hekate course has a little bit of a different structure to it. It looked like to me, I haven't taken that course, but it seems like that one has more of a threefold structure, and it seems like it might be a little bit more sort of through a path rather than just a simple presentation of a bunch of different things.
Right. In that course, we spend the first, I'd say, 4 or 5 weeks looking at invocations of Hekate from the Orphic hymns, from the Greek magical papyri. What does it say about her? Who is she? Really, what is she? Why call on her? Why not Hera or Juno or someone like that?
Sure.
What makes her special? And how can we define what her function is? So she's just not one name out of many who happens to have more cultural purchase now than others. So we look at, the first kind of third of it is looking at invocations and hymns and descriptions from like Hesiod or other writers who wrote about her to answer the question, who is she? What does she do? What does she have to offer us? And what do we have to offer her? The middle part looks specifically at her role in necromancy, because as psychopomp, as soul guide, she has an integral role calling upon spirits of the dead. If we want to communicate with them or have dreams about them or learn information from them or do the sort of magic that's associated with ghosts, to be frank. And then the final third of the class is looking at the Hekate and the Chaldean oracles, which are a series of they're fragments of mystic writings from late antiquity in which Hekate plays sort of a celestial
much larger
ensouling creatrix.
Yeah.
So to understand that, we look a bit at the Platonic structure, the writings of Socrates. We look a bit at the systems of Gnosticism that were active at that time. And then we look at the Chaldean oracles and we say, who is this Hekate? And how can she be sort of, aligned with the necromantic one, the grave prowling black dog that we know from the PGM, or the lunar spirit, that's a creatrix from some of these spells. And then we try to we look at how she functions more recently. How does she appear in the plays of Shakespeare? How did Aleister Crowley write about her? what in Gnostic texts like Pistis Sophia, how does she appear? We look at how she's sort of downgraded to a scary demon, and subsequently by writers from the Romans to the Elizabethans.
And in modern neo-paganism, she plays a role largely as the third in a maiden, mother, and crone, and she kind of gets cast as the crone, even though if you look at sort of the ancient literature, she's usually actually youthful in most of it, but for some reason she gets stuck in that slot. Do you have any familiarity with that, and why that might have happened?
Well, right. I mean, other people have written about how Crowley wrote of her as a sort of infertile hag, and he wrote quite a good poem to that effect. But then she gradually sort of layered into that idea of a triple goddess as the crone, right? What at first I would always kind of vociferously argue that wasn't historically accurate, because as you know, the Greeks envision all their gods as eternally young and beautiful.
And beautiful, yeah.
With a few exceptions, like maybe Kronos or someone like that.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, these radiant, they were ageless because they were eternal. They existed
Sure.
outside of time, and they didn't have bodies. These were spirits. They could choose to appear to us.
And why would you choose to appear as old?
But they didn't age because they didn't have form. So you can argue that, but I think ultimately what I came to understand, the more I became her devotee and studied her, is so many of the old hymns and invocations and conjurations call upon her by numerous paradoxical epithets. You call her radiant girl, monster, violent one, giver of gifts, radiant, full of light, you who bring madness, bull-headed, girl-faced, horned, you the serpent, crowned with fire. You look at these like, well, which is she? No, she's all of them. That's the hallmark of divinity. This paradox, this sense they can be many things. You can't nail them down. They're not one thing. They're a multitude. They're unfolding continually. They're beautiful and terrifying and inspirational and helpful and hurtful and dangerous and reassuring. And so I don't, argue with people anymore about the crone self, because I say, who am I to argue? She can't be a crone if she wants to, if she's, a lot of times they are a thing and they are the thing's opposite. They're not binary, they're both. Apollo is a bringer of health and order, and he's also a bringer of plague and disorder.
And
so
madness.
Which is he? He's both. How can Hekate, if you call her beautiful, radiant girl, how can you not call her, terrifying, a woman?
Is Hekate a mother goddess? She gets sometimes conflated with some of the sort of Near Eastern great goddesses. Is she a mother, or is that not really a role that she's a part of?
I'm glad you brought that up. The thing is, she has very little developed myth, and there's really no convincing myths about her having a husband or a consort or bearing children, other than a handful of references of this or that are inconsistent in various poetry over the 1,000 years that she was honored regularly. She's a very liminal character, and to some degree she's blank. You can project on her what you need or want to see. So she's not celebrated in ancient texts that I'm aware of as a mother figure, as for instance Demeter would have been, who was the embodiment of all motherhood, or Hera, who's the embodiment of a head of the household, a woman who's a wife and a mother, and things like that. But, I think that there's a more mystical Hekate in the Chaldean oracles, who ensouls all things, who enlivens with spiritual fire, who defines the boundaries between places and times and things and states and realms. And that is very much a creatrix, And even in the PGM, sometimes as Hekate Selene, she's called the Alpha and Omega, the mother who begets all gods, men's, mortals, And so there is a more cosmic aspect of her that is a generatrix, a creatrix, and you can't deny it, It's in there.
But so her mother aspect is that sort of super celestial, very
Yeah.
at the beginning motherhood, rather than the more sort of practical, down to earth. I'm a goddess who's going to help you with childbirth and sort of thing. You know,
Well, right. And you know, there is some overlap between referencing her and some, you know, goddesses typically associated with childbirth. But in my personal opinion, it's because I think she embodies thresholds. And obviously for a child to be born has to cross a threshold of a
very
woman's
much.
body to be born healthily,
Yeah.
just the same way as she's, you know, in reference to helping decide who wins the race or who wins the battle, or whether the cattle breed in the barn, or whether
Right.
all these are thresholds. And if she's the guardian of the gate, if she embodies what stands between here and there, and the wealthy and poor, and innocence and experience, then you have to literally pass through that gate, which is her, with her permission. And so, yeah, so you're right. I think there is sort of a celestial generatrix aspect of her, but then there's a much more practical one where she embodies the gateway through which we must pass to become what we are from what we were.
My wife's mother has a funny story. My wife was born on mid-May, which is right after Mother's Day. So she was 9 months pregnant with a baby,
Oh,
and she went to a restaurant where they were giving flowers to mothers for Mother's Day, and
yeah.
the waitress was like, "No, you can't have this flower yet because you haven't had your baby yet. You're not a mother yet." It's like, so
Oh my
there's
God.
definitely this liminal thing where, you know, you have
Wow.
you can be pretty far toward the process of being mother, and some people are still not going to see your parenthood yet. And
Oh
and
my God.
and I remember when my first daughter was born, there's this moment where you realize, wow, this is actually happening. So I mean,
Right.
there's from both, like, both as a self coming out of the world, but also as the relational people
Yeah.
with that being that's coming in. There's definitely a liminal threshold that's being crossed in a lot of ways during that birth process. So for sure, I can
Right.
see Hekate as liminal entity in a bunch of different ways there. So on a practical level, your Hekate course, there's a book that goes with it. How closely does that book relate to the course? And also equally of importance and interest, and I'm sure to some people, you have this Greek Magical Papyri course. Is there a forthcoming book related to that course or not?
Well, no, I mean, here's the quick answer. Anyone who takes my PGM class should get a copy of the PGM. You know, it costs like $30. You get it on Amazon. It's not a big deal. My Hekate class, you don't need anything. I provide the materials in PDFs, so there's nothing really needed for that. I will say, I'm planning to start in April a class that's based on following the rituals. I'm going to hold it up again and wave it. The rituals in my book. So this will be sort of a second tier Hekate class for those who have my book and want to work through the rites, you know, just which reflect my own personal
Sure.
working. So that one hasn't been announced yet, but it'll be through the Blackthorn School as well.
Hekate, the two Hekate things that you offer, the book and the course, right now they're not really connected with one another, or?
No, the Hekate course I offer now, the one that will go in February,
Mhm.
is not based on my book. It's based on traditional rites of Hekate and
Okay.
hymns in the PGM, you know, Hesiod, the Chaldean oracles, curse tablets, and things like that. So that class is sort of to establish how was she actually invoked in ancient times? Who was she to the people who worshipped her back then? What role did she play? So that we get to know who she really was without the overlay of modernity, you know, like, well, I saw in Charmed, she did this. Well, that's not what this course is about. This course is about the people who, you know, who adored her and invoked her. Who was she to them, so that we can have an authentic traditional background if we choose to go forward with her.
And so your book is a development on that that's more personally about
Right.
your perspectives on it.
Right. My book is an expression of my personal path. So anyone who chooses to take that class, having bought my book, you know, we'll work through the rituals together. But if they've taken the earlier Hekate class, and they'll see where they come from, because of course I'm inspired by the traditional praxis. Though of course the stuff I wrote is just my own gnosis, my own work.
So in terms of your own practice of devotion to Hekate, do you have an image of her in the room that you're in right now, or?
You know what I do? Let me show you. I'll show you my the icon that I use. I'll move the phone a bit if you don't mind.
This is you're getting very real.
Yeah. This is I don't know if you can see it, but this is my working space.
Yes.
And this globe here is where I contain her shrine. And if I open it up,
Holy cow!
this is
Wow.
the image. Yeah, so there's an icon in it to which I've attached numerous materia associated with her, such as, you know, lead and obsidian and myrrh and hellebore. It's attached in the back. The icon itself is created by an artist by the name of Dumpf, who's a beautiful artist. And as you can see here, I've got a combination of dried flowers, black candles, burnt myrrh, wine. And if you look closely, there's the amulet that you created with a key on it, which I'm really attached to, and is a beautiful amulet that I absolutely love. So
the name of the artist you created the icon at the center there. I think I didn't hear, so I don't know.
Oh yeah, sorry, it's Dumpf, Dhomth. She's a woman who creates beautiful art. I think she lives in Eastern Europe, and one of her illustrations appears in one of the deluxe versions of the Hekataeon. So she created this image. She only created 11 of them.
Amazing.
And yeah. So this is where I, you know, kneel down every evening and light these candles and burn myrrh. And
thank you for sharing that. You're the first person to actually show their working space in so much detail. People have described it, but you've actually shown us it completely.
Oh, that's nice. I like it. Well, I'll also show you. There's a in my book I talk about consecrating a mask to Dionysus, because in traditional Dionysus worship, his epiphany was a mask, one of them. And at his at Delphi, they would alternate years between Apollo being sort of in residence and Dionysus being in residence. And when Dionysus was in residence, people would adore and worship a mask of Dionysus set on a pillar with ivy climbing up it. And so in my book, I urge people to create a Dionysian mask and consecrate it to the god. So I'll show you mine. And this is my consecrated Dionysus mask. It's based on an actual mask that was a Roman cavalry mask found in a mass grave in Germany. Wow. So it has great meaning to me, and it's the subject of the Dionysian devotions I do, mainly offering of wine, burning of storax, reading the Orphic hymn to Dionysus. And here's, as long as we're talking about masks, I don't know if you can see them, but these are 3 masks. Sometimes I'll do group rituals where I'll have 3 women wear masks and act as Hekate, since there's triplicity associated with her.
Sure.
And I've made these masks. It's kind of hard to get a glimpse of them, but they come with these long veils.
Wow.
And they have sort of, they're crowned with these black spires. Yeah, and I use them. If you don't mind, I'll show you. It's like show and tell, you know.
Right, no, I love it.
These are, here's an amulet that I bought. Here's one shrine with an amulet I purchased from Peter Jenks.
You've got your finger in front of it. I can't see too well.
What's that?
Move your finger on the phone.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's all right.
I can't see what you're saying, right?
Right? No, that's beautiful.
Right, and there's another one with an amulet purchased from him. It was a gift from a good friend.
And you've got a beautiful that looks like one of the triangles of Hekate that from Pergamon or a couple other places where they.
Oh, right, correct. This was created by my friend Alison Tchaikovsky,
right,
who of course does wonderful Solomonic talismans and amulets, and has a store and a website called, I think, Practical Sorcery.
Practical Occult, or Practical Magic, so one of those things.
Yeah, right.
But yes, I interviewed her, and she's shown me a picture of that before, but I haven't seen one in living motion, so that's great. She does occasionally sell them.
I have a thing for masks, and these are some African masks that I've purchased that are quite beautiful.
Wow, is that a goat mask right there?
Yeah, this is like a sheep or a ram, and this one is a mask of a Igbo maiden. You can tell by it's meant to be a beautiful woman with quite
I'll
sharp
take your
teeth.
word for it. And the
Right.
Dionysus actually is a patron of theater. Pisistratus, the Athenian dictator or tyrant, basically started theater as we know it in ancient Athens,
Right.
and under the patronage of Dionysus as divinity. Do you feel does Dionysus play a significant part in your life because you also are a lover of theater as I am? Is that something that's significant? Because masks and theater kind of go hand in hand.
No, you're right. You're right. I love and I've been to that the Theater of Dionysus at the foot of the Parthenon in Athens, and I have a few stones here that I stole from it.
Oh, we
But,
don't want to mention that because that's probably super illegal. But he didn't actually do that. He's just saying that for fun. He's not desecrating cultural land.
They're quite small. They're quite small. But no, it was funny when I saw it. There's this, it's really not that big, but it's beautiful. But there's a strange stone wall around the stage itself. It's about 3 feet high.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked our guide, I said, "What's up with the wall?" And he said, "Well, when Rome took over Greece, he said they had different tastes than the Greeks did. So they built this wall so they could perform naval battles." So instead of doing the classic plays of Aeschylus and Euripides, they would have, these wooden boat. They'd fill it with water, put on wooden boats, and have people beat each other and play pirate. Basically do Pirates of the Caribbean on this sacred stage. So I thought, it sounds, the joke about Rome being sort of like America is pretty accurate, I thought.
Yeah, possibly.
Right.
I think the Colosseum actually has a bunch of mechanics underneath it where people they had constructed a lot of possibilities for doing mechanical naval battles and that sort of stuff.
No kidding. That's fascinating.
So anyway, thank you for sharing that. That was great. That's great. So
thanks for asking.
I'm going to let you go in a second here because I think this has been quite a long time. I've been holding you prisoner to this this interview. But do you have any sort of closing thoughts or things you want to share about courses or upcoming offerings that you just want to go over one more time? We've talked about it a couple times, but
no, I would just encourage anyone who's interested, to check out the Blackthorn School. Not only my course, but there's a great class offered by my friend Amaya on stellar magic for people who want to do traditional star praxis. There's a class by my friend, the Reverend Zemi, on a contemporary expression of the god Thoth, finding a way to let him, Thoth Jehuti, act through you as far as spiritual and artistic creativity and sorcery. Is going to be a wonderful class. And there's a cool class that's coming out on tarot by Megan Holloway and my other friend T. Susan Shang. So there's all kinds of neat courses being offered. Mine is simply one of them, and I feel really privileged to be offering on that platform because they've been extremely good to me, and I've met some wonderful people doing it.